Good. Let's get started. So, welcome everybody to today's third lesson of our SpecFlow Masterclass, Automating Scenarios with SpecFlow. Again, Gaspar is with me, he's trainer, author, and founding member of SpecFlow, and I'm Andreas Willich, the community manager of SpecFlow. Quick reminder before we start, some guidelines. Please use the Q&A tool for the questions at the bottom. Use the upvoting tool. As you saw yesterday, we are not always able to answer all the questions, so that's why the order is important. We'll go through them in the order, and so sometimes it can happen that we don't answer everything. Yeah, we still have the dedicated Q&A part at the end. Reminder, please don't use the chat for questions. We'll have again a quiz, and if you attend all 4 of the masterclasses, you can also win an Amazon voucher. Something also new, perhaps you see, we've enabled closed captions. There was some request yesterday for that. I see that, to be honest, first time usage of the feature, no idea how it looks on the viewer side. But you're wondering why it's there. And also, again, the starting poll that we know who our audience is today.
Well, I think the closed question can be switched off, right? So, or I don't know whether it's now enabled by default. Probably it is, but it can probably be. Well, at least I see a show subtitle. Probably there's a hide subtitle as well.
Yeah. Now I have also a hide subtitle.
Subtitles are great, but unfortunately they are not really prepared for Hungarian English accent. And or at least usually when I see the automatic subtitles of my own talk, then it's not very good. Or is it?
It looks good. Looks good what I see.
Oh, probably the artificial intelligence has trained itself. So probably if I talk more, then it's getting better and better.
So, and with that, let's close the poll. Quick share of the results. A little more. I have used already SpecFlow, then not today. A lot of testers, developers, hello product owner and business analysts to today's session. And yeah, we lost government people, and a lot of attended yesterday's course. Good. Thank you, Paul. And with that, guys.
Zoom rearranges all my windows. Hopefully it's visible. Let me know if it is. And then we can get started. Very good. So yes, welcome everyone. Now it's Wednesday, so it's the 3rd day of our BDD masterclass. And basically most of you were here, so I will just really going through quickly about the generic stuff for those few people who were not here in the previous days. So basically this is a program that we started last year, and our goal with the BDD masterclass is provide some little bit more deeper content related to BDD and SpecFlow. And our goal was that the content should be usable also for those who are already doing BDD and SpecFlow, and also for those who are new to this topic. Some of the sessions will not need coding skills, but today's one is an exception for that. So today we will do more coding, and yeah, it's a presentation. On the other hand, we will have a longer Q&A to have some interactivity. As I said in the previous days, if you are interested in hands-on live instructor-led courses, and I'm also doing such things. If you go to my website, then you will find all my detail, all the details for that. So again, just like yesterday, you might have heard something that you are not necessarily agreeing with. I'm always happy to discuss. So for example, if I say that you should have your automation code as clean as the production code, you might not disagree, might not agree with that, then come to me and I'm happy to talk about that. But of course, it can happen that you will get the answer that I already showed up yesterday. Okay, so overview of the lessons. Basically, we are the third one. On the first one, we wanted to see how this BDD process looks like and how it fits to the landscape of other quality and agile related things. Yesterday we were talking about how we can write better BDD scenarios, or all the scenario writing related details. That's what we are calling formulation. Today we will focus on SpecFlow, so what kind of patterns, concepts, whatever happens with SpecFlow. And tomorrow we will see some maintainability problems, reporting problems, how to manage a larger set of scenarios. So that's what is coming tomorrow. Before I go to today's agenda, yesterday we almost finished all the questions, just a few remained that I was scanning through after the session, and most of them were fortunately kind of ones that hopefully we are anyway answering today or tomorrow. So, but there was one that I wanted to mention. It's also related to today's topic, but maybe I will not have time at the end, or maybe I will forget at the end to highlight that. So, and it's a formulation related question. So basically the question was that is it a good idea to assert on fixed messages, success messages, error messages, warning messages? So is it a good idea to put the exact error message into the scenario? And of course the real answer is that it depends, but in usually, at least in bigger scale applications, probably not, because the exact message is anyway provided by someone else. It's changing, maybe it's even translated to different UI languages. So probably having the full exact messages is not such a good idea, because now then you have to come back to the scenario and always modify it. However, something, let's call it a key, that is providing you a hook or a link or a handle to the exact message is useful, and putting those message keys into the scenario, I think this is a useful practice, especially if the key is made in a way that it's somehow readable. And even in our sample application, you will see an example for that. I think it's in the question answering feature file. You will see that that I highlighted that in that case, not the real error message we provided, but a key to the error message. But based on the key not logged in, you can guess what kind of error message you expect to see. And in the code base, basically the test is doing the same translation that the application would do, and then does the comparison. We have a small helper class there called error message provider, and that's what does this magic. So that's my general suggestion for these messages things. So I'd rather use a readable key. That's probably the point on that. Okay, so that was a question that I wanted to quickly highlight. Anyway, I mentioned already that we are using our demo application. So our demo application is still the same. It's Spec Overflow. It's a simple Q&A site. It is on GitHub. So feel free to check that out. Feel free to play with it. It can be also used as a kind of SpecFlow playground. You make a fork of that, and then you can test your SpecFlow skills or automate a couple of more things that are maybe not covered yet. So feel free to play with that. And of course, you can also provide some feedback, even in the form of pull request if you want. But now let's go into the today's things, and probably the first thing is what I have to highlight is that now source code will come. And I think if the 2 other days were exhausting, then the 2 days today's session will be even more exhausting probably, but let's try to manage that, and let's see how we can get over that. This is the today's agenda. So again, I will try to make an even shorter version of the BDD summary so that that we get into the theme and we don't forget that what we are, why we are really here. And then I will show and talk about the SpecFlow core concepts. If you have done SpecFlow that already, then maybe some of these things will be already known to you, but I will also try to add some additional information, some information about the future changes in SpecFlow, something like that that might be also important for you as well. So that's hopefully everyone will enjoy that. Then we will have a separate topic of this state sharing problem. I will introduce the problem. I think it's a very common one, and I think it makes sense to have a dedicated part for that in the today's session. And then the next main topic will be about automating at different layers. Yesterday we already started to talk about that when we phrase the scenarios, we don't want to focus on the actual automation concern, because that opens up the opportunities, and now we have the opportunities. So now we can see what are the different options for automating the things at different layers, and I will show you a couple of variations, a couple of options that you can consider and choose whatever is best fitting to your needs. And then we will just basically, the last two will be basically just a quick summary of other things that you should consider, and actually the last one is going to be even a homework if you want to see it like that. Okay, so that's the today's agenda. Let's get started. So as I said, I would like to start with a very quick summary of what we learned about BDD so far, or what we said about BDD so far. And basically, at the end, it's reduced to one slide. We said that BDD is helping us to make a better connection between the requirements and the solution, the requirements and the application that we are producing. And we want to make this connection for several different reasons, but actually what we want, that our application should really fulfill the requirements and not just do something and finally match the original expectations, but we want to have a better control on that. And there is a gap. So the requirements are typically, in some cases you can write down the requirements, but any written down requirements will be imperfect. So the requirements is something which is somewhere in the head of the product owner, somewhere in the head of the business, and we have to work to be able to get that out and make it in a form that we can use it for application development. And the BDD scenarios are somewhat working as an artifact like that. So they are in the middle. They are in the middle because they are expressed using the business language, using a language that your product owner, that your business analyst will be able to understand and say that, yes, this is what I wanted, or say that, no, this is not exactly what I wanted. But it is structured and specific and and formatted enough that we can use that as a starting point for generating automated tests. And this is what SpecFlow is doing. So at the end, if you want to play with the words like that, then we can say that these scenarios are on one hand validating the requirements, so checking whether the requirements are still making sense. And at the same time, they are verifying our application, whether the application is fulfilling those particular requirements. So that's how it works, and that's why it is sitting in the middle. We said yesterday that we want to have 3 practices, or we need to have 3 practices to do BDD. The first one is the discovery, when we are talking about the requirements, trying to shape them in a way that they can be a good input for scenarios. And we highlighted that examples are the magical things there. Examples are some sort of lightweight scenarios, and this is what we would like to understand or distill from the requirements to be able to generate scenarios out of them. Generating scenarios or writing down the scenario is the formulation. That's what we talked about yesterday. And at the end, we would like to automate these scenarios as well. And since this is a SpecFlow BDD masterclass, obviously now we are focusing on the SpecFlow tool, but SpecFlow is part of the Cucumber tool family. So whatever you see today and all of these 4 days is generally applicable also for all the Cucumber tool family products as well. It's also true for Cucumber. They are working similarly to each other. And basically SpecFlow, we can say that SpecFlow is the official .NET version of Cucumber. So they are really belonging to each other. I mentioned yesterday that we have a bunch of good stats that we gathered through the years. It wasn't always like that. So I remember the beginning when we had the first 10 users, we were super happy and we made a small little celebration in the office. And now we have whatever, more than 33 million downloads on NuGet. And if you would just search on NuGet how many SpecFlow related packages are there, then it will be over 400 that you can find, for example, today. So that shows that it started its own life and it's started to build its own community. And I'm really happy to see that. Okay, so that was the quick intro and a little bit of warm-up also for myself. And now let's go into the first topic, which is about the SpecFlow core concept. And I would like to address basically the approach, how you are working with SpecFlow. I would like to say a couple of words about the setup things, especially about the reasoning and some ideas behind, and talk about the core features, the core elements of the thing that you will use with SpecFlow. Now, I will do the majority of the things today through demos. And demos are always working in a way that I will have a slide like that, which is having just a title. Then I will try to do the demo and try not to forget anything that I wanted to say. And then at the end, I will also show the slide. The slide deck is basically will be just a reminder for ourselves later on that these were the topics that I demonstrated, if I haven't forgotten anything. So let's get started and let's talk a little bit about the SpecFlow concept and how the setup should look like. So basically, I'm just switching over to my Visual Studio, and you can see my Visual Studio with this Spec Overflow solution loaded into. And basically, if I would just see it in the project level, then you see that I have 3 projects, at least in this solution. I have 3 projects, the specoverflow.web. This is basically our production code. I have a specflow-overflow.test. This is containing the programmer test or unit test, if you want to say it like that. That's not, these were used, or at least a few sample of them. These were used to be able to develop this application in a test-driven development style. But this is not the topic of us for today. And we have something which is now called specoverflow.specs.controller thing. So the specs is the keyword probably here. So we have a specs project, and this specs project is basically containing all the SpecFlow related details. Okay, in this specs project, we see a couple of folders, but right now let's just look at the features. And in the features folder, you see a bunch of feature files. The feature files are those things that we learned how to write yesterday. So the feature files contain these scenarios. For example, in the home feature, that's what you see here loaded. You see that we have a bunch of scenarios, altogether 4 in this one. And these are even grouped into rules. Yesterday, we talked a lot about how this rule relation looks like. And now you can see examples where we have a rule. For example, a positive message should be shown on the home page. And now we have a simple scenario, which is ensuring that the right message should be displayed on the home page. But we have, for example, this last rule, which is saying that the latest 10 questions should be shown on the home page. Now somehow we decided to to illustrate that with two scenarios even. And one scenario was that the latest question is shown on the homepage with details, and the other was that that the latest 10 questions are shown on the homepage. For whatever reason, it was easier uh, to illustrate this rule with these two scenarios and not try to make a magical huge scenario that does shows these two things at the same time. So these feature files are in the SpecFlow project, and the SpecFlow project has been already configured by me, and therefore if I just make a build, actually I already made it, but if I would make a build for the solution, then what would happen? Then suddenly from the scenarios you would see some tests generated. There are multiple ways of seeing tests. I mean, you can use your favorite test execution tool, but for Visual Studio, obviously this Test Explorer window is probably the most obvious one, not necessarily the best one. And in this test, if you haven't never used the Test Explorer window, then you can find it by clicking on the Test menu and call it Test Explorer, and then it opens up. So in the Test Explorer window, you see that there are a bunch of tests, and there are some tests which seem to be related to the scenarios. So for example, you can see one which has the name welcome messages shown on the home page. And now we have, and because we had a scenario called welcome messages shown on the home page, obviously that would work in a way that if I would change this to a different name, X welcome message, and would rebuild my project, then if everything works fine, then suddenly I have a new test, this X welcome message shown on the homepage. Basically, this shows that basically the tests are reflecting these scenarios. So basically, SpecFlow somehow turned these scenarios into executable tests. Okay, so we can obviously run those tests, and hopefully these are all passing. And if I run that, maybe one thing to mention that, of course, right now I see a passing icon, and typically if you see a passing test, then you just run away and do something more useful, because if it's passing, then why look at the details? But if we are really want to, we can look at the details in this small unusable window. It's very hard to find any detail, but fortunately with the newer Visual Studio versions, there is an open test log button or whatever command where you can put the same thing onto the main window. And basically what you can see here under this test messages, that whenever the test was executing, then basically it was saying what has happened step by step. It is basically saying that first it was running the when the user checks the home page step. It was done using this automation method. We will show that in a second. And then it was running this then step, which was done by using this other method. So basically, from the execution trace, we can also see in detail what has happened in the background. Now, you see these tests be executable here. And we said that, I mean, if you want to just say that, we can say that SpecFlow is running your test, but it's not. It's literally not true. SpecFlow, interestingly, is not directly able to execute your tests. This was a design decision that we have made right in the beginning. And basically, originally, it just started because of some optimization thing. Obviously, you are not, you haven't tried to make a test execution framework, but if you would try, you would realize that a test execution framework has a lot of complexity. It has to handle different processor architectures, it has to handle different .NET framework versions, it has to handle different threading modes, and many other things that at the beginning we didn't want it to deal with. Actually, the first version of SpecFlow was done within a week, so it was really a short time when I did that, the very first version. So I didn't want it to deal with all this complexity. And anyway, at that time there were already a bunch of very good test execution frameworks available, like NUnit, XUnit, or MSTest. So the idea was that instead of SpecFlow directly executing the scenarios, basically SpecFlow is rather asking an execution framework let's say that NUnit, then it would ask NUnit that, hey, NUnit, here is the scenario, here is the way how this should be executed. Could you please run it for me? So that's basically the core concept. So SpecFlow is not able to execute the scenarios alone, but it requires a test execution framework to be able to do that. Now, this is not a big deal because we have these test execution frameworks available, and SpecFlow supports all the main players here. So it supports NUnit, it supports XUnit and MSTest. And for SpecFlow, it doesn't matter which one you choose. So if you generally we say that if you are using NUnit also for your programmer test, then use NUnit for here as well. If you use XUnit, then you can use XUnit for SpecFlow as well. So the only thing why this is important, because this is a decision that you have to make, and this is a decision that you have to tell to SpecFlow. So you have to tell to SpecFlow whether you want to use MSTest or want to use NUnit or something else. I will show you in a second how this could be done. But basically this is told to SpecFlow by using the appropriate NuGet package. So right now it's already configured, so it's not that visible. But if you would zoom in, you would see that we were using a specflow.mstest NuGet package. And normally this is the only package that you need to use, and basically that tells SpecFlow that, hey, I want to use SpecFlow, hey, I want to use it with MSTest, and obviously otherwise your project has to be prepared for MSTest. So either you can do it by just starting from a test project and then add the specflow.mstest, specflow.NUnit, or specflow.XUnit package. Or what you can do, especially if you are using Visual Studio 2022, then we have now a nice project wizard. So you can say add new project, and somewhere you can find a SpecFlow project as well. And if you choose the SpecFlow project, basically there is a wizard where you can select which unit test provider you want to use, and it all configures that one for you. So that's the easy way to do, but doing it manually is also not a big deal. You just need to use one package that is matching to your test execution framework that you want to use. Okay, so basically that's the core things about how SpecFlow works and how you should configure. So SpecFlow is not able to execute your scenarios alone. It uses a test execution framework to do that, and you have to tell SpecFlow which one you would like to use by adding the appropriate NuGet package to your dependencies. Maybe one last thing that I want to show when we are talking about the project setup and generally the SpecFlow concept is this folder structure that you see here. Basically for SpecFlow, it doesn't matter which folders you create. So you can call this folder features, you can call it anyhow else. SpecFlow will find your feature files anyway. But this is a useful convention that many BDD practitioners, not only the SpecFlow practitioners, but also Cucumber practitioners have used, and I think it's pretty useful. So typically these are the folders that you see. We have a features folder where you see all the feature files, maybe even in a subfolder. Typically we have a step definitions folder where we see where we store the automation logic for the different steps. These are called step definitions. You will see it in a second. And typically we have a support folder where is the everything else, any kind of supporting infrastructure. And sometimes we also have a drivers folder. We'll come back to that later today. So basically the features, step definitions, and support are pretty much standard naming conventions that you will find in most of the SpecFlow projects. Makes sense to continue that practice. Okay, so basically that's what I wanted to mention about the SpecFlow concept and the project setup. And if you do that, then basically your project is ready to run your tests. However, we don't only want to run our tests, but we want to work with SpecFlow in a convenient fashion. And therefore, probably it makes sense to say a few words about the Visual Studio integration and how you can use SpecFlow within Visual Studio. Visual Studio is one of the most popular development environment or IDEs that .NET developers and .NET use for .NET coding, and unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but Visual Studio by default doesn't know about SpecFlow. It doesn't know about the Gherkin syntax. It doesn't know about the idea of feature files. And therefore, if you would just open this feature file in a simple unprepared Visual Studio, you would see just a black text here. However, now you see that the keywords are nicely colored. They can have collapsible things, and there are a couple of other things that you see here. So somehow the Visual Studio has to be prepared to be able to work with feature files. And this can be done using a Visual Studio extension. Visual Studio extension can be browsed and installed through this Manage Extensions part of Visual Studio, where in the online space, for example, if you search for SpecFlow, you will see a bunch of different things. I mean, for us, the only one which is interesting is this one, basically SpecFlow for Visual Studio 2022. That's the extension that prepares Visual Studio to be able to understand Gherkin and add some convenience things for that we can work more easily or more conveniently to that. So that's what you need to do. It's a one-time thing, so you only need to add this extension once to your Visual Studio. It's automatically updating itself, so that unless you tell the opposite. So whenever we are releasing a new version of the Visual Studio extension, then on the next day you will immediately receive it, and so it always gets better. So besides the syntax coloring, it also supports things like navigation. So you can say go to definition and it jumps to this automation code that we will talk about. That you can even jump back if we define step definition usages and then go backwards. There are some coloring of the parameters, as we will talk about them later, and also it comes with a couple of templates. So if you say add new file, well, the add new project was also a template that was added by the extension. But if you say add new file and select this SpecFlow folder from the left hand side, then you see a bunch of item templates, like a new feature file, like a new SpecFlow configuration file, or a SpecFlow hook file. We will talk about these things later. So that's for the Visual Studio extension in at least in Visual Studio 2022. There are Visual Studio extensions for the earlier versions as well, and you can also have a Visual Studio extension for the Rider as well, and for Visual Studio Code there are also multiple extensions that support Gherkin syntax. So far, we were all using this, or at least the majority of the people were using this Cucumber Gherkin full support titled extension, where you can find some link under the link. You will find some ways how you can configure. But recently, within a month or for a month, the Cucumber team has released a new extension, and that also works already with SpecFlow as well. It's not fully perfect, but it's getting better and better. So that's something that definitely makes sense to try and see. Of course, that's a heavily evolving part, but hopefully that will be also a useful stuff to use if you are using Visual Studio Code, which is more practical if you are, for example, if you don't have Windows. Okay, so that were the details about the Visual Studio integration, and now we can talk a little bit about the step definitions. So these step definitions are the ones, these automation blocks that tell you or tell SpecFlow how you gonna automate or how you want to automate particular steps in your scenario. So for that, I needed to just jump to the right starting point, and I hope that I haven't screwed that up. Let's make a build. Okay, now, so this looks good. So this is the same home feature file that you have seen before. Let's just consider now the first scenario. This is a very simple scenario, of course. A majority of the SpecFlow projects have much more complex scenarios for that, but yeah, let's just look at those. What you can see here is that you see a bunch of English steps, so saying that when the user checks the home page, or then the home page main message should be. Unfortunately, SpecFlow by default doesn't know how to interpret those things. It knows about the keywords, so it knows when you say when, so that you want to initiate an action, but it doesn't know what the user checks the home page really means. So to be able to make this test actually executable, you have to tell SpecFlow how this particular step is going to be automated. And what you can see here now from my Visual Studio coloring is that that some of these steps have this purplish color, which means to me that for those steps, SpecFlow doesn't know yet how these steps should be automated. So that's why they have this purple color. So from the SpecFlow's terminology, these steps are so-called undefined. No one has defined them how we wanna what to do when the test is actually executing. However, there are some other steps, probably these ones that we have used in different feature files already, that are turned to black. In this case, that means that these steps already have some definition. We already defined how we want to automate those things. So let's just look at one of these step definitions. So I'm just saying go to definition. And what you can see that this is just almost like a standard .NET method. It has a name, it has some body where you are doing the automation magic that is required for you to perform that particular thing. In this case, this is a given step, which is generating a bunch of questions, and this is the way in this project how we can generate multiple questions. And this is where the things gets interesting for SpecFlow. This particular method has a given annotation, a given attribute with the .NET terminology, where the parameter of the given attribute is telling SpecFlow which step this particular method should be matching to, so to say. So that since it says that there are some number of questions asked, therefore SpecFlow knows that whenever this step has to be executed, then this method should be called. As you can see, since this was this step had a number in it, therefore we had some parameter placeholder. I will talk about that a little bit later. And we have some we have a parameter in the method as well. In this case, this is even an int parameter, and obviously SpecFlow, whenever it reads out this number from the feature file, it automatically converts it to an integer. So there is some sort of automatic conversion. This is a step definition method. So that's the naming of these things. So this is a step that you have in the feature file, and this is a step definition that tells SpecFlow how to automate that particular step. We used to say, and it's a little bit confusing, but you will understand in a second what I mean on that. We used to say that step definitions are global, and when we say global, that means that whenever, if you are defining a step definition, if you are writing a step definition, then you can use it in any feature file within your project. So for example, if I just say find usages, then you will see that, I mean, you will not see because it's so small font, but you will see that it's used in the home.feature files file. This is what we have seen. And it's also used in the question.feature file, because this is also where we needed to generate a bunch of questions. So they are global, which means that they can be used in any of the feature files. So there is no one-one matching that the step definitions of a particular feature file has to be in one class. You can define it anywhere within the project, and SpecFlow will find it based on the attribute you put on that. Right now you see a given attribute, but of course you could have a when or then attribute as well. So they have a global visibility, if you want to say it like that. One thing that is super important to mention, that SpecFlow, whenever SpecFlow is trying to find your step definitions, trying to scan your code and find methods with for example, the given attribute, it only looks at classes that have this special binding attribute. This binding attribute is also coming from the SpecFlow library. This is a kind of pre-filter for SpecFlow. So if it doesn't have the binding attribute, then SpecFlow will not even look at the class. So therefore, it will not find your given when or then step definitions. It's a typical mistake that if people are just forgetting to put the binding attribute on that, and then suddenly nothing works. Typically, in that case, that should be your first thing that you check, that whether I put the binding attribute or not. So that's basically the core element of the automation. These are the step definitions, and for each step, sooner or later, we should have a step definition, because if not, then SpecFlow will not be able to execute the method, or well, it will be able to execute, but it will fail. So right now, this welcome messaging is shown on the home page, has a bunch of undefined steps, and therefore, if I just run this scenario as a test, then basically it just returned into a kind of skipped or undefined state. And if I would look at the details of the test log, then what it would say that, hey, it hasn't found any step definitions for a couple of steps. However, if you want to start with a new one, then this is a good starting code. So copy paste this into your project, and then you can start working by filling out these methods with some meaningful code. That would be one way to get started with creating new step definitions, and that works in anywhere, even if you just use a notepad and a console. However, if you use Visual Studio, then you can use some features that are coming from the extension. Namely, there is one which is called it's in the context menu of the feature file, called Define Steps. And surprisingly, what it does, it just helps you to define those steps that were undefined so far. So basically, it lists all those different potential step definitions that could make your feature file usable. You can choose which one you want to start working with. You can just have all of them checked. You can provide a class name. I will just keep it home step definitions. I think that's a good name anyway. And I would just need to hit create, and then it would create, and then it will create a new class. If I already have the class and I just want to extend it, then probably it would make sense to click on the copy to clipboard, and then it basically copies this code to the clipboard, and I can paste it to an existing class. But since I don't have a home step definition class yet, therefore I just hit that one, and finally the thing is working. Now I generated these step definition snippets or skeletons for that. As you can see, these are basically empty methods currently throwing some pending step exception thing, and obviously I would need to finish those to be able to have a working setup. But already, if I did that, already the steps are changed their color to black in Visual Studio, at least most of them. As you can see, some of them are still purple. That's basically how the Visual Studio extension, the new Visual Studio extension works. It tries to make some smart decisions, but actually you need to make a build to be able to fully refresh the coloring. So after you modified your step definition attributes or generated new step definitions, then it makes sense to make a build, and then finally the coloring is all complete. And now I would be able to start working on this code base by implementing these different methods and telling my system what to do when someone wants to automate, wants to run the when the user checks the homepage step or the other steps later. I will not do that, but that's basically, that would be the next step for us right now. Okay, so far basically what we have seen that these step definitions are the most important automation elements that you need to use with SpecFlow. You have to annotate these methods with the given, when, or then attribute, which are containing some sort of expression. I will come back to that. They can have parameters, and SpecFlow is somewhat smart to be able to convert those parameters. And these step definitions are global, and you can use them in any feature file within the same project. Now, probably at this point, it would make sense to stop for a moment and talk a little bit about these expressions that you have seen at my step definition methods. So I don't know if you have used SpecFlow before, but probably if you have used SpecFlow before, then this kind of thing that you see here, this is a parameter marker, and we had a parameter marker also here as well, are maybe new to you. What you typically were seeing before, let me just comment this out, what you were typically seeing before is something like that. So maybe this was anyway so-called verbatim string, but we can even keep it like that. So actually after this main message should be, we wanted to have a double quote, and then within the double quote you will see something like dot star and a closing double quote. So that's what you have probably seen when you have used SpecFlow earlier. Based on this magical syntax, probably you can guess that this is something called a regular expression. Regular expression is basically a pattern language that is hopefully known by many of the people. And originally, Cucumber and also SpecFlow has used regular expressions to be able to make this matching. So to be able to tell SpecFlow when to apply, for which steps to apply this particular step definition method. If the step text is matching to this regular expression, then go ahead and apply it. If it doesn't, then not apply it. Then probably another step definition will apply to that. So that was working. This was working for many years, and actually, as you can see, it was also supporting some sort of parameter handling. For parameter handling, we were a little bit misusing the regular expressions because we were using basically the regular expression groups. So this parenthesis thing is a regular expression group. And we were using the regular expression groups to be able to highlight where the parameters are within the text of the step. And it was using some simple rule that the first regular expression group was going to the first parameter, the second group would go to the second parameter, and so on. But it was all working fine. However, if you did this in practice, then you have probably seen that regular expressions are a little bit over complex for this task. So first of all, if you want to make a double quote, then it's super hard to make that double quote because you have to make backslash. In regular expressions, you anyway want to have backslashes so that you either have a backslash everywhere or just switch over to this verbatim string. And sometimes you have some much more complex regular expressions here. So maybe some people would say that here anything could come which is not a double quote or something like that. And definitely, if you look at this regular expression here, this is just a standard regular expression, but it's not really intention. It's not really showing your intention. So you see a bunch of magical thing here, but actually what we wanted to hear is a string parameter. So basically a regular expression, we're a little bit too smart for that, or too complex, or too generic for that. And to avoid that, a couple of years ago, I think it's like 5 years ago maybe, the Cucumber community, so all the people who were contributing to the Cucumber related open source project started to think about an alternative expression language that is fitting much better to the purpose. And at the end of this long discussion, finally, the expression language called cucumber expression has born. So basically, the cucumber expression is the one that you have seen before. Basically, for simple steps which don't have any parameter, like this one, the cucumber expression is exactly the same as the regular expression was. However, for parameterized steps, you can use a much more simpler parameter marker. So for example, you can say curly base string, and then SpecFlow knows that, hey, a string should come here, and that string can be wrapped with double quotes, or if you want, it can also be wrapped by a single quote as well, and that one works too. So that's something that works by default, and you don't have to deal with that. If you say int, then it knows that there has to be some numbers, and there are a couple of other built-in parameter types, word, for example, that you can use. And basically that way you can express your intention, express the matching of your method to the steps in the feature file in a much more straightforward way. It also supports some alternation. So if you want to have message or messages, then you can just write it like that, or message or whatever heading. Then you can say with a slash, it's an alternation. There are a couple of other things as well. Those are more rarely used, but I think the coolest feature of cucumber expressions is that you can express your parameters in a much more straightforward way. Now, with the current released version of SpecFlow, the SpecFlow 3.9, the cucumber expressions are not enabled by default, or not integrated by default. But as you see, my code was working, so obviously it is possible to use cucumber expressions already right now. Right now, to be able to use cucumber expressions with SpecFlow, you have to use a special SpecFlow plugin. But don't worry, using a SpecFlow plugin is a very simple thing. Again, you just need to add a new NuGet package. And in this case, the NuGet package is called, it has a very long name, because anyway, this is just a temporary solution. It is called cucumberexpressions.specflow.3-9. So this is a plugin for SpecFlow 3.9. And basically, this is just enhancing SpecFlow to be able to understand the cucumber expression syntax. It is backwards compatible, so just because I use the plugin, I don't have to use cucumber expressions all the time. I can also use regular expressions, and in the majority of the cases, SpecFlow is smart enough and realizes that, okay, this is a regular expression, so I will rather treat it like that. And generally it works fine. If somewhere there is a confusion, then you can always just make it even more regular expression, like highlighting this caret sign in the beginning, or the dollar sign at the end, and then for sure SpecFlow will know that this is a regular expression that you wanted to use. But for the majority of the cases, the automatic decision is just working fine. So right now you have to use this cucumber expression.specflow NuGet package. However, we are already preparing the new next major version of SpecFlow, which is, it seems to be that it's going to be called SpecFlow 4. Hopefully will be released somewhere in August, or an end of summer at least. There, the cucumber expressions will be the default way of how you can express step definitions, and you don't have to do this this packaging thing. So basically that's the thing that makes sense to highlight about cucumber expressions. So let me get back to my slides just to see. Yeah, so basically that's what we have seen. So cucumber expressions have been introduced. It provides these default parameter types and a couple of other things. And hopefully with the SpecFlow 4, it is going to be used by default. By the way, because the Visual Studio integration for the navigation features, so for this go-to definition, it needs to understand the expressions as well. Therefore, the cucumber expressions in the Visual Studio They only work if you are using the Visual Studio 2022 version, or if you are using an earlier version, you have to use the DevRoom extension. The DevRoom extension was basically a try to rebuild the extension for modern SpecFlow versions. If you use that, then you can also use Cucumber expressions even with Visual Studio 2017 or 2019 as well. So that works basically fine. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So far we talked about steps, step definitions, the basic setup, and we were talking about some of the parameters. But there is a special parameter type called data tables. We have highlighted it already yesterday when we were talking about formulation. And let's see that a little bit more in detail. So let me just switch over to my right branch. Yes. To be able to make this demo. And I need to make a build because otherwise my Visual Studio is getting confused. Okay. And if I go back to my home feature file, then actually somewhere in the middle, there is a scenario which is using a data table. Basically, this is this scenario that we have seen earlier. The latest question is shown on the home page with details. It says that given the question is asked as, and there is a data table coming here, and of course I could have multiple questions as well, then this and this happens. Basically, I was using a data table here because I needed to provide multiple different details for the question. For whatever reason, I wanted to provide the title, and this is not the best scenario, but it's a little bit tweaked for this demo. And for whatever reason, I wanted to provide what are the votes, answers, views, and who was asking this, and therefore putting this all into the same text of the step would make a too long step. So that's why a data table is much more convenient for that. However, this is also helping me to show how the data tables can be handled with SpecFlow. So what you can see here with this step definition, that there is an attribute, there is a question just ask us as. By the way, you can see that there are different alternations, so you can use these step definitions with different names as well. But that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that this method has a special parameter of the parameter type table. Basically, this table parameter type comes from SpecFlow, and this table type is basically representing the data that you have provided here. With SpecFlow data tables, SpecFlow is always treating the first line, first row of your table as a kind of header row, and on all the rest is basically the data rows, and that's how you should see that. So whenever we are talking about the data table rows, typically we are talking about the data rows. So in this case, this table has a single data row, so to say. So let's look at this code and let's see what it does. So basically, the purpose of this code is to prepare the system with a specific question or specific questions. So it receives the list of questions in this table argument. I was now calling it questions table. And what it does, it just takes the rows property of the table class and just enumerates through that. So basically, rows contains all the data rows. And now every row is getting into this row variable. And what it does then, it just takes out the different cell values of that row, takes out the title, takes out the votes, takes out the answers, views, asked by, as you can see, and then populates some data based on that and generates these questions. As you can see, for example, when I take out a cell from this data table, that is always a string. So even though that I have written here a number, the row votes is returning me the string version of that number. So to be able to use it as a number, I need to perform some sort of conversion. So I'm just doing an int parsing to be able to use that as a number. Okay, so that's basically some basic things how you can process a data table, you can use the rows property to go through the rows, and you can just use this indexer and index it with the column headers to be able to take out the cell values from a particular row. And again, the rows only contains the data rows. So in our case, this was only containing one. So that's the basic usage, and based on that, you will be able to use data tables as well. However, if I have this code here, then this gives me the opportunity to show you a nice helper method that makes our life much easier. As you can see in this case, what I'm doing, I'm just taking out the title cell and initiating a property called title. I'm taking out the votes and I'm initiating a property called votes, answers, views, asked by. So basically the property names are matching to the header names except casing and spaces of that I'm using in the data table. If this is the case, then I can use a helper method, which is more or less doing the same thing. So I'm just commenting this out just to keep it as a reference. And what I can do, I can say that, hey, the questions should be generated by a helper method. And this helper method is called createSet. So basically, I can use this createSet helper method on the table. This is an extension method. You have to use the TechTalk SpecFlow assist namespace, but otherwise it works fine. And I have to provide the type of the name of the type that I would like to populate from each row. So basically, I'm just saying that, hey, createSet, please create me question data objects in a way that you should move out or initiate the properties based on the row cells. So that's what it does. And it's a very smart method because it also realizes that maybe that this votes property is a number, and therefore it automatically converts the rows, the votes string into a number, so I don't have to deal with coding. And at the end, the result is the same. If I would run the test, I would get the same passing test because this createSet is basically just generated a bunch of question data, and that I was able to use to generate the questions in the database based on that. So that's a very useful helper method. There is a counterpart of that. So createSet is basically generating data. And by the way, the createSet also has some overloads to use some defaults. So you can specify what to use as views if the views was not provided, or what to use as title if the title was not provided. There is an overload for that where you can. There's a bunch of overloads where you can basically create the default object or a lambda that creates a default object for that. I will not go to that. You will find examples of that in the code base. Just search for createSet. So there is a counterpart of the createSet, which is because createSet is generating new objects from a data table. And there is another one in the voting answers. I think somewhere I have it here. In this, doesn't matter, in some other scenario, I have a then step where I provided a data table, and I want to make sure that the answer list is containing really these kind of items. And by default, I can just do it in the same way how we did. I have the table as a parameter. I can just take the rows. In this case, I'm doing a for loop, so I'm just indexing the rows, taking out the content, making assertions on that. So that all works. That's the manual way of working. But to be able to simplify this code, because again, we are doing it in the same way that we are comparing the content with the content property, comparing the answer by with the answer by property, I can use a similar helper method to the createSet. It is called compare to set, and it's a kind of assertion method, and it just basically makes sure that what you got as objects is really matching to the data that you provided the expectation as a form of a data table. So these are all very useful helper methods. You can find more details about them in the SpecFlow documentation. They can really be useful extensions to your things. Okay, so that were the data tables. And basically my last demo in this section Again, let me just switch over to a better starting point. It's about hooks. So hooks are very useful things with SpecFlow and also with Cucumber. Hooks can be used to be able to perform some actions at different moments of the scenario execution. So maybe if you want to run some code that runs before the scenario is starting or after the scenario is finishing. Yesterday we had a question related to the background gherkin thing, whether there is anything similar to background that you can use to so to say tear down the thing. That's for example something that you can use with a hook. Let me just show you how that works. So to be able to make a hook, typically hooks people are putting into the support folder. Basically what you would need to do, you would need to make a new item. And the easiest way would be just to go to SpecFlow and use the SpecFlow hooks as a template, and it will just create a new hook template. But I will not do that. I will just try to do it manually just to show you how what kind of things to take care of if you do that. So I will just call it the class myhooks, and it will generate me a class. I just need to make these classes public. That's all fine. And basically, hooks are working similarly to step definitions in a sense that you have to put them into classes that have the binding attribute. Binding attribute is something that you shouldn't forget. Otherwise, and you should not have a typo in there, because otherwise your Visual Studio will not understand that. So you should have a binding attribute on those classes. Otherwise, SpecFlow will not be able to see them as binding. So now I don't want to make any useful thing to do. I just make a simple method like print before, and I will make another one called print after. And what I would like to do, I would like to ask SpecFlow to call this method and print the hello before every single scenario. And I can do that by adding another attribute to that, similarly to the given when. Then it is called before scenario. And similarly for the after printing, I need to have an after scenario Visual Studio. Am I so smart? But unfortunately, the completion is not so good. So a before scenario and after scenario. If I did that, then basically this method will run before every single scenario, and this method will run after every single scenario. Hopefully we will see that. So I was just running the welcome messages shown in the home page, and if you see the log, then you can see hello before was executed, then the when step, then the then step, and hello after was executing. So basically, the hooks were working. By default, these hooks are really working for or supporting or running before every single scenario. But you can also limit that. You can limit that with tags. So if I would have a tag called foo here, then I can say that, hey, this before scenario should only be executing if it has a foo tag, and I can provide this tag filter as a parameter of the before scenario, similarly to the after scenario. And then this method would only be called if the scenario itself has that particular tag, and it wouldn't be called for those scenarios that don't have the tag. So if I just run all of these, then we should see the message for the welcome, and we shouldn't see the message for the other scenarios. So welcome, we have here the hello before, and for the other, we don't have the hello before. So that's how we basically filtered the tag, the hook for a particular tag. If you have multiple hooks, you can even specify some sort of ordering. So you can say order equals 1 will run earlier than order equals 2. So you can also specify some ordering. And maybe one thing that makes sense to mention that the after scenario hook is working like a tear down. So it's not only executing if the test was passing, but also executing if the test has failed, so that that can be used to basically close the browser, whatever, clean up any kind of infrastructure that you had so far. Okay, so So that's basically the last important core concept that would make sense to mention with SpecFlow. The hooks, we have a couple of different hooks. We have seen the before-after scenario. We have a before-after test run. We have a before-after step, and a couple of others as well. And basically, you have to put them into classes with the binding attribute, and with the order setting, you can influence the execution order. Okay, so with that, basically we finished this core concepts part of the today's session. So basically we have seen these things. We have seen the project setup and generally how SpecFlow works. We have seen the IDE integration, the Visual Studio integration. We have seen how step definitions are working and how we can use cucumber expressions for that. And we have seen data tables, which is a very commonly used parameter type, especially can be used together with the create set and compare to set. And we have seen the hooks there where you can do some before after kind of logic. Yeah, and with that finished, we can move on to our next section, which is about state sharing. And whenever we are talking about state sharing, what I would like to say with that is that how to share some data, how to share some information between steps or between step definitions, and you will just see it in a second what I would like to mention with that. So let me just jump to my starting point. Yes. And now let's look at our scenarios. Let's make a build just to make sure. Okay. So let's make a basic case of data or state sharing so that you understand the problem. And for this very simple scenario is just enough for us. So let's look at how this was actually finally automated. So I just go to the step definition of the when the user checks the home page. And basically, at least in this automation code, what it does, it just basically performs a call to the home controller class. Home controller class is the class which is serving the home page details. It creates a new controller class, and right now it's this step definition is just calling this get home page model method on the controller, and the result is a home page. The result contains all those details that should be displayed on the home page. So if you just if I just go to the definition, you see that it just creates a homepage model. It sets the main message. It sets what is the current username, what is the current admin, what are the latest questions whatsoever. So basically, it returns me or just creates this homepage model that is displayed on the homepage. However, the verification whether we wanted to check the main message is in another step definition because it's in another step. Then the home page main message should be, and we had some string here, so we had some welcome to Stack Overflow here, and to be able to make the checks, we need to access the data that was returned by this method. And what you can see here now in my code base that whenever I called this method, the result, the returned homepage model, I was saving into a field. Basically, this field was declared in the class, and it was helping me to remember the data that was generated as part of the then step. So whenever we got to the then step, then basically we can make the right assertion. In this case, we say that the homepage model main message should be the expected message. That's an assertion with the Fluent assertion library. Okay, so that's a basic way of data or state sharing. In this case, the two step definitions that wanted to share the data were sitting in the same class, and in this case, declaring a private field and setting the private field on one hand side and reading the private field on the other hand was a solution that we were using here. And the good news is that this is an absolutely safe solution. When I say safe, that means that that there is no chance that whenever we are checking the homepage model in the Dance tab, then we see a homepage model saved by an earlier scenario, because SpecFlow is creating new instances of these step definition classes for every single scenario. So every single scenario starts with a brand new empty step definition class. So it will have an empty home page model. So if you are making the check here, and if this check succeeds, then you can be sure that this was really related to your particular scenario. Basically, your scenario is isolated from all the other scenarios. Doesn't matter which order you have executed the scenarios and which other scenarios have been executed before. So that's the basic way of doing state sharing. Simply use some fields. If the step definitions are in the same class, then this is the easiest and safest. And so this is a perfect solution. No need to go further. However, unfortunately, it's not always the case like that. So sometimes our step definitions that we would like to deal with are not necessarily in the same class. So for that, we have another example in our code base. And this other example is this user logged in, login related scenario. The logged in username is shown on the home page. And actually this one has 3 steps. And the first 2 steps will be more important for us right now. It says that given the user is authenticated, when the user checks the home page, that's actually the same method like before, then the username should be, the username of the user should be on the home page. So basically it should show who is the logged in user. And the thing is, and let's look at the code and let's see how this works and what kind of problems we see here. So if I go to this when the user is authenticated method, then you can see that this is not placed in the home step definition because the login has nothing to do with the home page. But I created a separate step definition class called outStepDefinition for that. So it's sitting currently here. And what it does, it is just somehow performing a login action. In this application, the authentication and authorization system works in a way that if you perform a successful login, and here we would use some the default username, default password, so hopefully this is successful, that the result of the login, the successful login process, is a random string, a so-called authentication token. And this authentication token should be remembered. And every subsequent call within the same user session, we have to provide the same authentication token. With browser, this would probably go to a cookie, so you don't necessarily see this, but right now we are not using browser automation, so now I have to do this, manage this token manually. So as you can see right now, what I did, I performed the login, and as a result, I got an authentication token, but I didn't save it anywhere. It just basically will be forgotten. On the other hand, when I say the user checks the home page, that's the same method that you have seen before. And maybe you have noticed that right now I'm just passing in null. And instead of this null, we would need to pass in the authentication token that was generated by the previous step. However, this step definition is in the home step definition class. So it's in a different step definition. Unfortunately, I cannot just declare a field and access the field. To be clear, I could declare a static field, but static fields are causing a lot of other problems. So declaring a static field is not really a useful solution for that. So because of that, this scenario is not even working right now. So if we just run that, then this log the user thing would be failing because it doesn't know about my token, it doesn't know about my user, and therefore it just thinks that it's an anonymous user. So that's why this scenario is at the end failing. So this is the problem that we would need to solve. And to be able to solve this, we can use a concept from SpecFlow, which is called context injection. This is is not an easy concept, especially if you don't have development background. So if you are coming from the testing space and you have never ever used dependency injection development techniques so far, then this will be a little bit more complex for you. But once you learn that, it's very, very useful. So definitely it makes sense to check that out or to learn that. If you have used dependency injection, then basically context injection is just a simplified dependency injection, so it will be all good for you or all easy for you. So let's go back to this concrete case. So in this concrete case, I would like to share the authentication token between these two-step definitions. And to be able to share this token, which is just a string, I needed to create a class, which is basically a kind of wrapper class around this authentication token. I was calling this class outContext. That's a typical naming convention. These classes that are remembering some data are usually called context classes with SpecFlow. This is just a naming convention. You can call it as you wish. And as you can see, this context class is able to remember. So it has a field where you can save the authentication token, a couple of other things as well. Those are not so important for us right now, but the authentication token is the one that we would like to that we would like to work with right now. So the outContext class can remember a token. So what we would need to do now, whenever we are generating the token, whenever we are performing the login, somehow this token, we would need to save it to the current authentication context class. And to be able to access the current authentication context or the current outContext class, this is where we would need to use the so-called context injection feature from SpecFlow. Context injection in SpecFlow works in a way that to be able to access these kind of context classes, what you need to do, you need to declare a constructor method to your step definitions class. Normally it will be probably empty. And at the constructor parameters, so the parameters of your class initializer method, you need to list all those types that you would like to access to. As you can see right now, I need access to two things: the authentication context, because I want to save this token into that, and the authentication driver for some other reason, not so important right now. Whenever SpecFlow is initiating this class, it realizes that, hey, this class looks like that it depends on the out context. So it just makes sure that there is a unique authentication context instance for this scenario execution, and just gives it to this method. So what I'm doing, I'm just saving it to a field so that I can access it in all the other methods of the same class. So I declare the field, saved it to the field, and then basically I can just use that field to be able to save my token into my context. So I was calling it underscore out context. So I can say underscore out context dot token equals the token that we just created. So basically what I did, I saved my token into this context class under the name out token. So far, so good. So basically what the context injection we used was consisting of two steps. One is that declaring a field for that, and the other is that we had to list it in the constructor and initialize the field. And once you do that, you can basically use your context classes in all of your step definitions within the same class. So we did now in this out step definition, we would need to do the same thing in the home step definition. As you can see, I already prepared this so to save some typing. So I already declared again a field for the out context. I also added a field, a parameter for that in the constructor, initialize the field there. So that's the pattern that you need to remember. And once this is there, you can just use this data as you wish. So for example, I can just say that, hey, out context, give me your token. And then I'm just accessing the home page with the same token that we have used for authentication. And that's why it will, it is going to pass at the end. Okay. Maybe this is, if you have never seen context injection or you have never seen dependency injection, that this might be hard for you. I recommend you to check this code out and play with that and try that out. The SpecFlow documentation also contains a page about the context injection. Makes sense to check that out also in detail. So that's basically an important thing that that you should take care, you should learn, because this is quite essential to be able to use or access shared data. Okay. Good. It will not really be a demo, but I just wanted to show you that so far we were using the context injection to be able to access some data. So we wanted to save this token into the out context, but you are not really limited to that. So in your context class, you cannot only have fields or properties, but you can have some calculations as well. You can have some additional methods as well. So, for example, in this out context, I have included an authenticate method because this is something that I needed in a couple of places, and I didn't want it to always copy paste this piece of code. So basically now it's in the method, and I can use it in much more convenient way. So instead of these two lines here, I actually could just say out context dot authenticate, and I would need to pass in the username and password, and then this one this would work as well. So that's you are not forced to only use these context classes to store state, but you can also use them for using automation logic. For example, this authenticate method that you have just seen. Okay. I mentioned that this context injection is basically a simplified dependency injection, and actually SpecFlow is using a simple dependency injection framework underneath to be able to support that. This dependency injection framework is called BDD, and basically it's a private dependency injection framework for SpecFlow. For basic things like sharing some data, it is absolutely fine. You can even do a little bit more configuration as well with BDD as well, but you are not necessarily limited to use BDD as dependency injection framework. So if you are a bigger project and you are already using some well-known dependency injection framework like AutoFac or the Microsoft dependency injection framework or Castle Windsor, then you can also configure SpecFlow to be able to use that. We have several SpecFlow plugins to be able to use those dependency injection frameworks. And then you can use your own DI configuration that you anyway got used to. Okay, so to finish this part, basically this state sharing is a very, very important topic. Makes sense to practice that, maybe even if it sounds a little bit complex in the beginning. If you need to share data or share state between step definitions, if they are in a simple class, just use fields, and if they are different class, then dependency injection is your friend that can help you. Okay, and with that, a longer intro time, we finally got to a little bit of fun part. Our quiz time comes.
So, daily struggle with Menti. So, yes, yes. So you should see the well-known guideline screen.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, cool. Good. Yeah. As the days before, we have 5 questions total. The faster you answer correct, the more points you get. The profanity filter is still their names, and it works. Mentimeter works best on Chrome. And yeah, we now will get an Amazon voucher from us. And here is it. The QR code or the code to enter. And I'll give you 1.5 minutes to join.
Yeah, and after that we will have a break. It was a longer start thing, but anyway, after that you will have some time to refresh.
1.5 minutes so long.
Yeah. People need to get out their phones, enter this long code or read the QR code. And hopefully then you are getting in.
The camera needs to focus on the right
Yeah,
thing.
although this, at least on my screen, this QR code is maybe even too big, so I have to...
Got again the waiting music.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
If anyone has a good suggestion for waiting music for tomorrow, then please share with us in the chat, or it's info@SpecFlow, or no, let's do it in the chat, otherwise people will quite might confused.
It's nothing that is copyright protected that ways, that we didn't get problems with YouTube with the recordings.
Yes, you need to strip that out from the recording. That's too bad.
Good. So time is up. We got 60, 61. I think you can. There was something.
Don't change the things. It's the live system.
Yeah, let's start.
Let's get started.
So how many packages are listed on NuGet.org when you search for SpecFlow? 24, 422, 176, or 219?
Yeah, I think I didn't forget to mention that. So
No, you mentioned it. It was not on the slides. You mentioned it only in audio. Ooh.
So usually so far we were always tricky because it's not the biggest number was the right one, but in this case the biggest number was the right one. So, but at least for the 7 people who made it right, actually, yeah, there are 422 packages related to SpecFlow in some way, which is pretty nice.
So the short leaderboard.
But don't worry if you didn't make
Yeah.
it. So usually I think the questions are pretty hectic. So
Question 2. How many SpecFlow related NuGet packages need to be installed to get a simple SpecFlow project working?
Okay, so the simple case. So just for example, use SpecFlow with n unit. How many NuGet packages do you need to add? One.
Yes,
Yeah, very
one.
good, very good, very good, very good. You can add the SpecFlow package in addition. It doesn't hurt, but it's unnecessary because the SpecFlow.NUnit or SpecFlow MS test is anyway having the other ones as dependency. So okay.
Yeah, and it was, I think, 2 weeks of work to get it down to one package to make it as easy as possible. So, third question, what is the new step definition expression syntax called that use parameter references like curly bracket string? BDD expression, spectral expressions, cucumber expression, orient expression.
Yeah, cucumber expression is the right answer. Very good. Very good. Thanks for the one vote for the orient expression. I spent so much time on trying to find something funny for that. I know I failed, but anyway.
It's in the dead jokes category.
Yeah, probably.
Which is of the following statements is not true for the case when you store data in an instance field of a class? It's too long to read for me. Time.
That's again the timing of the Menti is not really ideal for such long text. But those 23 people were really good. So yes, the right answer was the third one. That is not true. Okay.
Good. Last Last question. I would say everything is still open. What is the driver pattern useful for?
You haven't seen this yet, but
Encapsulates the automation of a particular component, generates random input data, runs the scenario with different input parameters, and helps you get home safe.
it's encapsulating the automation, so the driver pattern. This is what we are going to talk about later today. So that 21 variable person was very well done here. Let's see. And
So,
Rebecca, very good.
congratulations. Please contact me at info@spec.org. I wrote the address also in chat. And also please add on which Amazon store, from which Amazon store you want to have your voucher.
Very good. And now, please, and now comes the break. Refresh yourself and we will come back in 5 minutes and continue. See you later.
See ya.
So basically before the break, we have seen a bunch of things. And basically these things were all related to the SpecFlow core basics. And we have learned basically all the most important features that you need to know about SpecFlow. We learned about steps, step definitions, parameters, data table parameters, state sharing, hooks, configuration, and setup, all those things. So when I was doing the demonstration earlier, probably you have noticed that I was automating basically the application by just calling the domain classes, in this case calling the controller classes directly. But of course that wouldn't be the only way how I would be able to automate this particular application. And yesterday we already started to think about that especially if the scenarios are phrased in a tool agnostic way or automation agnostic way, then basically the same scenario could be automated in multiple different ways, depending on which one is providing a better result for me. So in this section, I would like to show some of these aspects and show you how much the automation would be different if we wouldn't automate the things using domain classes as we did before, but how we could do automation on the web API. This application fortunately has a small little web API or through the UI as well, and we can also think about some other alternatives as well. So that's what the next main topic is about. So we said yesterday that since the scenarios are, or maybe I don't know whether we highlighted, but since the scenarios are describing the problem from the user's perspective, therefore automating them through the user interface would be probably the best option from the quality point of view, because if we are automating it through the user interface, then it's actually verifying what the user sees. So if that test is passing, then we can more or less be sure that that functionality is properly implemented. But unfortunately, automating everything through the user interface is slow, brittle, costly, and a lot of other problems are with that. Since we are doing automation for the business functionality, and typically the business functionality is implemented by the backend of the application, another popular choice is to automate the application through your backend API or REST API if you have such, because this is generic and typically fast enough. Of course, if you are automating the application on that level, then you will not be able to test the UI, but maybe you can compensate that with other kind of test. And of course, there are some other entry points for the testing. You can even go even further lower into that. You can go to some service interface, or you can go to the app domain classes like we did. And the choice is not only where you enter, what is your entry point for the application, but how many things you are automating together with the application. So how much you are automating in integration with those stuff, or how much you mock or stop those aspects. Again, the ideal would be to test everything end to end, because then if that test would pass, then we would be fully sure that it works. But in many cases, this is simply impossible, or it's not efficient. So in many cases, we need to stub or mock out some external dependencies to be able to have some useful combination or efficient solution for that. All this to be able to find the sweet spot. Basically, the test automation pyramid can help you. It can help you with a thinking tool, as a thinking tool. Of course, the pyramid is probably you know that anyway. So you can think about your tests that are testing your stuff at different levels, and the more you go down, the more cheaper and the more faster you will have your tests. And obviously you can have more of them. And the more you go up, your tests are becoming more costly and slow. So therefore it makes sense to only have a few of them. And yeah, so basically putting your tests and your scenarios into the pyramid can help you to find what is this that good combination that helps you to achieve your quality expectation, but still keeping your stuff maintainable. So far, as I so far what you have seen were domain class automation, which is generally probably the easiest. It's almost like at the unit level in the test automation pyramid. If we go upper, and this is what we will do right now, then this will raise some interesting questions. So first of all, if you are automating through some external interface, then basically it becomes a black box. So you will have less chance to tweak some internal details. You have less chance, or it will be harder to mock or stop things out. You also need to manage the infrastructure. If you, for example, do a browser automation, then you need to start the browser, stop the browser, and you need to deal with that. You probably need to deal with much more configurational things. And the more complex the code becomes, code application becomes even more problematic. And obviously it's because of the nature of this integration test, the diagnosability is also getting harder, because maybe sometimes you will only see the error on the build server, but it runs fine on your machine. And then basically just relying on the output that you have provided can help you to figure out what was going wrong. There is no magical solution for that. So generally, we said earlier that the one of the best thing that you can do to address these problems is to treat your automation code as a first-class citizen. So just in the same quality level as your production code is. And one of the things that you can definitely consider is to introduce some sort of automation layers and try to layer your stuff so that it can the code becomes better manageable and better shareable across the components. For that, let me just show you a small little part of the application. And in this application, or in this sample, we will again see the same scenarios that we have seen in the home feature file. So for example, this logged in username is shown on the home page. You remember, this is exactly the same scenario as it was before. However, right now, I don't want to automate it with the control automation, just like you have seen. But right now, I would like to provide an automation for this particular scenario using the web API of the application. This application has a web API. So if I run my application, you could even see it in the browser. So that's the browser that you see. And I think if you say /API/home, for example, then you see what kind of things should be displayed on the home message. And so basically there are some other API endpoints, and this is what is used by the front end anyway. So my goal is now to check the exact same scenario, but now doing it through the web API. It would require a bunch of code, and and I already prepared this code for you so that that we don't have to spend the time for that. And I don't want to go through the entire code because it's fairly complex. This code that you see is only for automating this single scenario. Okay, so that's what you see here. So given the client is logged in, there is a bunch of things here. You will see when the client checks the home page, again there is a bunch of things. Fortunately, the then step the assertion is much simpler, but definitely we are not at the same level how we were before. You remember this was a 2-liner code, this was a 1-liner code, and now we have now we have much more complexity for that. And if we want to zoom in a little bit into this code, again, I don't want to go make a full code walkthrough. There you see a bunch of things. First of all, that it needs to deal with starting the application and stopping them. Whenever we are making, for example, a post request, then we need to deal with JSON serialization. We need to check the status codes and to be able to filter out some generic problems. Or if we deal with a GET request like we do for the home page, then we need to deal with getting out the content of the response body, deserializing it from JSON to some object, and we also need to deal with starting and stopping the application. So all of these things are all put into the same place, and that's why it is so big, and that's why this is so ugly, we can say. I think we all agree to that. Even though I put a lot of comments in it, it is still ugly. I think we can see that. So basically what we have so far, if you would like to visualize the thing that we have built up now, is that we have SpecFlow, which is the test runner, and all of the code is the testing code, and that's the only thing that we have here, which is currently sitting in the step definition layer. So the first thing that we could do, and this is what we are trying to do, is somehow we would need to try to extract the infrastructural things. So for example, how to start and stop the application, the JSON serialization for the web API calls, and similar things to some infrastructural components. What we would do, and this is what the final code base is supporting, and I will now just fast forward to be able to do that. Basically, all those things that are dealing with the infrastructural details, starting, stopping, JSON serialization, I just put into a separate class, which I will call Web API Context. Basically, this is going to be a context class, which can be injected or can be used in any step definition classes, just like we used the out context before. And it just basically encapsulates and hides all this complexity. So if I just fast forward to that, then finally what you can see that our step definitions are much more simpler. So what they are doing now, they don't have to deal with the starting, stopping. What they are doing, for example, making the post request, the only thing that I need to say that, okay, I need to know which is the endpoint. I need to know which data, input data I want to provide. And of course, I need to verify the end result. Or if I want to make a GET request, then I just need to say what is the endpoint and what is the data structure that the JSON should be deserialized into. And everything else is nicely hidden to this Web API context. I will not go through the Web API context in detail. You have the code base. Basically, it does all this magic. And this is a code that you can feel free to take it over to your project. You have the license to reuse this code base. So if you find this useful, or you can see it as a good starting point, then feel free to do something similar in your project based on that. So all of these things are hidden or encapsulated into the Web API context. And if I need to access the Web API context, I can just use the same context injection that we did before. Okay, so we extracted the infrastructure, and now this is in the Web API context. Right now, this is a good step, and as you have seen, the code became much more clear. But unfortunately, in a long time, so if you would continue like that, and if you would implement further scenarios for that, and we would have further step definitions, then soon later we would get to the point, and let me just fast forward there, where we have a bunch of other step definitions here. And because of this bunch of other step definitions require to access the same endpoints in different ways, we would start having some code duplication. So just as a basic example we had this given the client is logged in, where we had to perform the login for sending this post request to the out endpoint. But we have a when step as well, saying that when the user attempts to log in with username and password, which needs to do partly the same. So, I mean, this is still a very small code base, but as you can see, this logic that what is the endpoint, what is the good status code, whatever, these kind of things is basically starting to get replicated into the code base. So that wouldn't be good. What we would need to do, we would need to make a further, so this testing part, these step definitions are still too heavy. We would need to extract somehow the automation logic from that and separate it from the testing logic. And whenever we talk about automation logic, anything that knows how to make the login on the web API endpoint, that we need to make a post request, this is the endpoint, this is the good status code whatsoever. When you are thinking about extracting the automation logic for a particular purpose, then basically you can make some helper class that are performing this automation. Unfortunately, there is no very established name for how these helper classes should be called. Some people call them helpers, some people call them adapters. I think the most commonly used name for that is the driver, or the driver pattern is basically what we are applying here. But if you have used page objects in UI automation, then basically page object pattern is essentially the same here, and basically it contains all the automation logic. So again, what we would need to do, we would need to extract the automation details. What is the endpoint? What is the status code into a driver class? So what I would probably do, I would create a new driver in the drivers folder. Let me just fast forward for that to be able to show you what we have at the end. Yes. So I extracted the things to some driver classes, and at the end, what you can see that the class became much more clear. So that if you want to make a login, then I just need to I just need to say that, hey, login API driver, please perform a login with this data. Or when I want to just say I want to access the homepage model, then I can say, hey, home API driver, please give me the home page model, and it does that. You can look at these API drivers, not so exciting. Basically, they are encapsulating this automation logic for the home. It's extremely simple. For the authentication, it's a little bit more complex because it needs to know what is the endpoint, what is the good output, how to capture the errors whatsoever. But it's nicely encapsulated into a single class. So anytime when we need to use that, we don't need to duplicate that particular code. So so that's the kind of layering. And of course, you can introduce even further layers, but at least these three layers are, I would say, generally useful for many BDD automation projects. So try to separate the infrastructure. I think that's the level number one, but also try to think about how to separate the automation code from the testing code. And that's basically just giving you this driver pattern that you are automate or drive a part of the application. And as we said, it focuses on the automation concern is encapsulating the details, and typically doesn't contain the verification. So the verification is part of the testing concern, but it doesn't mean that the drivers cannot have some helper methods to make better assertions. So, but the verification is belonging to the test code. Okay, so that's basically what we did, and how we can clean up, for example, the web API automation. Similarly to the web API automation, we can have a look at how at the end this entire project looks like. I think anyway partly show you that. So at the end, if it's fully implemented, and you will find it in the online sample in the specs.api project, we have a bunch of driver classes. Basically, for each endpoint, we have an API, we have a driver class, and basically these driver classes are injected into all of our step definition classes wherever we need it. So for example, for the question asking step definitions, obviously we need to use the question API driver, and that's what we are using, for example, to ask a question in a nice way. So basically that's the structure of our API project. I suggest to have a look and see at the details of that. Now we did that for the web API, but obviously the same thing could be also automated through the user interface as well. And actually this code base also contains a project where some of those scenarios, for example, the home scenarios, are also automated through the web user interface using Selenium in this case. So if I, for example, would try to run them, because it's not using a headless browser, but it's configured for a real browser, you don't see it because it's in the other monitor, but basically it just runs through the application and just checks all the scenarios with UI automation. And again, but you can see that the scenarios are exactly the same, and we have provided a different automation model for that. The structure is again similar. We have extracted the infrastructural component. In this case, the infrastructural component is how to manage the browser. So we have a class called browser context, and this knows about how to set up a browser, how to stop the browser, how to navigate to a relative URL, and many other things. The different pages have again some driver classes. So for example, for the login page, this is like a page object model. It's a driver class for the login page. That's a page object. It looks like a normal page object. You have the locators for the different elements of the user interface, the name text box, password text box, login button, and you can have some methods which are interacting with that. For example, we have this do login or do action thing, which is logging in with some login input model. It just sets up the form and submits the form in a way that it's used for the that it's submitting your user credentials, and the step definitions as at the end will be very similar to the step definitions we have seen before. So for example, in the home step definition, you can just say, yes, homepage driver, please give me the homepage model. And this is basically just grabbing through the main message, the username and whatsoever, and just giving you in this homepage model structure so that we can do the assertions on that, or maybe for the registration, that's an input form. Again, we can just perform the registration. We can just verify whether the registration was successful. So the layering and the code structure is essentially the same what you have seen with the API, but now this one is using Selenium and implementing the same pattern with user UI automation. Definitely check that out. We have a new project called SpecFlow.actions, which contains some useful SpecFlow plugins or helper things. And in the SpecFlow actions, there is also a Selenium plugin. You can also check that out. That's also can be used to be able to implement the same thing. But feel free again to take any code from this code base as well. Okay, so now you have seen how to use the web API and the UI to be able to automate the scenarios. And obviously the same thing would work with any kind of interface of the thing. So if you have a desktop application or if you have a mobile application, similarly you can do the same things. The same layering would work, and you would need to separate the infrastructural things. You would need to separate the automation things, and everything else is basically remains to be the testing part. Okay, obviously you always need to consider the pyramid. So especially for the mobile, you definitely don't want to make so many tests with end-to-end mobile automation, because that's simply too slow. but maybe the majority of them you want to do it in a lower level, maybe at the API level of your application, or maybe to call into your domain classes, and only a few you would like to make through the end-to-end automation. Good. So that's basically what I wanted to say. As you have seen this separation, probably you have realized that actually at the end, the step definition code for the UI automation and the web API automation were actually almost exactly the same. So let's just look at for example, the registration. So this is how the registration looks like with the UI automation, and this is how the registration looks like with the web API automation. It's using different drivers, but the interface of those drivers are nearly the same. So actually, you can even use some sort of dynamic drivers as well. So depending on your configuration, sometimes it runs the same test with UI. Sometimes it runs it with web API automation. That's also possible here. Okay, so and with that, basically we finished this automation and different layers part. So that again, now you have seen the coding aspect of those principles that we highlighted yesterday, that the scenario should be automation agnostic. And now you have seen a couple of examples how the same scenarios can be automated with different things. Again, I mentioned it a couple of times already that feel free to look into the code and try to dig into that, try to see how it really works, because it has a lot of other details that I couldn't go into right now, but makes sense to check. So definitely having a detailed code walkthrough is helpful. Okay, we are quite much at the end, and basically just two things, or basically altogether three slides that I want to mention. The one thing is related to the feedback from the test. Again, this is a big topic. We could spend a lot of time on that, but just want to highlight, which I already highlighted earlier, that these tests are going to be complex tests, and therefore it can happen that you will only receive the failure from a build server, so that you have to especially take care of providing as good information, trace information, log information as possible to be able to figure out based on the build server result that what the actual problem was. I mean, this is just a general suggestion. Typically, if you make an assertion, don't forget to put some message on that. Basically, the thing that how SpecFlow is somewhat related to that is the thing that we mentioned, that the after scenario hook is actually also running in case of a failure. So you can use the after scenario hook to maybe save some log files or save a screenshot. You will also see an example in this code base, so you can see how this is actually done. But basically, that's a useful thing, and that is really improving your diagnosability of your tests. Okay. And the last thing, which is a kind of a homework that I wanted to share, is that what I have seen from the practice, that test automation code, or test automation as a work, is quite much pattern oriented. So generally, it makes sense to try to watch what kind of things you do, what kind of things you have to repeat, and do a couple of other forms, and try to identify them as some sort of automation patterns. And then if you identify those automation patterns, then you can share it with your colleagues, share it with your team, and whenever the next time you will have the same problem, then you will have a better chance to do that. In this sample application that I provided, I collected at least 10 different patterns that was used. I just have 2 slides for listing all these. So they are using the current, I will not list them because anyway, we are quite much over time. So we have 10 different patterns. This is the page one. If you want to make a screenshot, you will get the slides next week, but if you want to make a screenshot right now, then that's a good time for doing that. And there is a slide too that is basically listing the other 5 patterns that are used. So basically in these slides, I showed you a show mentioning of the particular pattern and the reference to the code base where you can find a class that is basically implementing that. So the homework would be to go through these 10 different patterns and try to identify it in the code base, try to see whether you understand it, try to see whether you have any questions, and if there will be, maybe tomorrow we can address those things. So focusing on the test automation patterns is a super important thing in my opinion. This is something that can really improve your efficiency. So basically our third book with Seb is going to be targeting that. So currently that's what we are currently working on. That's not the final title, but somehow it will be a collection of different automation patterns that work well with BDD. And of course, these 10 that you will find here in this application will be definitely part of that. So basically, that's how it is. And with that, let me just wrap up this session so that we have a little more time for the Q&A. Again, the key facts that I would like you to take home with you is that SpecFlow is not a complex tool, so the number of features is really not high. But the thing is how you are using it. The usage patterns are really important, and state management particularly is a typical problematic part. So take care of that. Take care of your testing strategy, what you are testing and how, and treat your automation code as a first-class citizen. Apply some nice layering, and that will help you to get a better maintainable code base, even if your testing strategy is using some complex testing like Web API or Web UI testing, and take care of the patterns and try to collaborate between devs and tests to get a good automation solution. So that's the end. And again, the same closing slide. The coupon is still valid for the next 2 weeks. So if you want to get the discovery and the formulation book, then use that coupon link on LinkPub and you get it basically for half price, so that you get 2 for 1 price, if you want to say it like that. And with that, let's jump over to the Q&A so that we can use our remaining time for the questions.
Yeah. A lot of questions, not much time. So let's get started. First question is about sharing state across multiple scenarios and multiple features. The use case is you have a login cycle that's very expensive in terms of time, and you need to do this in every scenario. How would you handle doing the login once? Caching, Chrome driver fixtures, cookie collection.
Yes. So you always have to be very careful with those things, but I think the questionnaire was also somewhat highlighting that, because generally the ideal thing would be having all the scenarios fully isolated from each other. But of course the practice is somehow not providing a good result for that, because for example, if something is very slow, so maybe even starting up the browser or having the login or whatever which you need for all of the tests, you need to do some caching. In this case, if you need to have such caches, of course you can use static fields, because static fields will be available for all of your scenarios. Of course, you have to be very careful with the static fields, especially if you are using parallel execution. So make sure that only thread-safe things like concurrent dictionaries or whatever else you are using as static fields. And SpecFlow also has some infrastructure to be able to store some data which is available for multiple scenarios, maybe all the scenarios that are running in the same thread. And that's what you can also use if necessary, but usually that's more of very advanced cases. But in this code base, if you will check the web UI part and I think in the browser factory, so there is some caching strategy or different caching strategy that are used for the browser. The one that is enabled now is having a browser per test thread. So if you have multiple, even if you would run it in parallel, each test thread would have its own one browser for its own. But the subsequent scenarios would be used for that. But you can also have a per scenario cache or per feature cache. Just look at this code. This is in the browser factory constructor, and based on that, you can get some pointers to that kind of thing. But normally static fields are just fine if you are careful with them.
Yeah, and two words from me. It's depending on what you're doing, you can lose stuff like parallel execution will get then tricky, and also your application needs to support parallel execution. If you're always using the same user and have a web shop and then testing the
baskets.
shopping cart, the basket, you will get interference between your tests.
Yes, yes. And even if you don't need right now parallel execution, sooner or later you will. Yes. So be prepared for that.
Yeah, I start all my stuff now always with having parallel execution in mind.
Yep.
And try all automation code to be already working that way.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Next question is long one. It's about structuring a large SpecFlow solution.
Tomorrow.
With the drivers and features folders and everything.
Tomorrow we will talk about that.
So about the before-after scenario attributes similar to setup teardown in NUnit. Are the equivalent hooks entry points for one-time setup, one-time teardown, or
yes.
How would you handle those?
Before test run, after test run. These are the attributes. These have to be static methods because there is no step definition class created for that. But yeah, that's what you can use. Yes.
Yeah, and one thing, don't mix. Not mix. Only you with your SpecFlow only use the hooks, because SpecFlow integrates into these
the pipeline of the
test, XUnit MS test attributes, and some of them can only be defined once. So use the SpecFlow hooks. Don't use
NUnit hooks.
Features. You will get in trouble.
For the SpecFlow project, at least.
Yeah, for the SpecFlow project.
Makes sense.
Next question is setting up SpecFlow when you're developing with containers. How would you set up this? I would.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Just in general for that, I guess he's talking about that when the application is running in a container, then probably I'm just guessing, then probably in the before scenario you would start up the container, and from the app you would just call the web endpoints or the web API endpoints, and then tear down the container on the after scenario or in the after test run. I think that would be the approach. Again, the structure is similar. We are having some infrastructural component which is managing that the container that hosts the application, and then the code, the test, which is actually exercising that.
Yeah, for that case, we have a SpecFlow action package. We simply configure the path to the Docker file or Docker Compose file, and to start it up, your application or not.
That's super.
Yeah, I wouldn't run in that case, I wouldn't run the tests again in a container.
Yeah, I mean you can go to further complexity so that whether your tests are running and that's not going to that.
But if you want to discuss things like this, our community forum is a good place for this.
Yep.
So, still some time left. So, with regards to globalness of step definition, does this ever lead to overly verbose step definitions? Gee, if you had multiple similar described actions, validate button in your app, would you need very explicit instructions?
Yeah, I understand the question. So that obviously, because they are global, you cannot make things like, then I save the form, right? Because then which form? I mean, that would be too generic. You have to say when I save the registration form or something like that. So yes, you have to phrase your steps a little bit more context aware. But usually that's not. I wouldn't call it over verbose, or I don't know what the phrase was. What were they using? But so I think it's a manageable thing. It doesn't really cause too much problem.
Yeah. So, next question. Is there a way to run specific actions only when scenario passes or when the scenario fails?
Yeah, again in the code base when you will check this um, in the browser one, if you check the browser hooks, you will see this after scenario which is saving a screenshot. Basically, this is checking whether there was a test error, and it only saves the screenshot if there was an error. That's the thing that you can check. So basically, you need to access to the scenario context. That's a class which contains a lot of useful information about the current scenario execution. And it has a lot of useful thing like it has a you can get the currently executing scenario name and many other things, but it also you can access also the test error, which is null if it was passing, and if it's not null, there is even an enum. You can also check that one as well.
Good. Next question is, why do you prefer inline examples versus tables? I'm not exactly sure.
So I don't know, but maybe probably the question was related to whether we should have the parameters inside in a table, or just put it into, I think in the API I have the shorter form of the same, not or I should just have it in an instance parameter. I think it's a matter of style. So of course, if you have multiple a bunch of parameter, then probably the table is more convenient. If you just have a few things, then the inline parameters are more convenient. Yeah. Try. Let me just show you another one. Asking question. No question details. Yeah, I don't know, somewhere we had an example for where we had the same with an inline version. Anyway, so yeah, whatever reads better. There is no high level preference. So I don't think that data tables are better than the normal parameters or vice versa. There are cases where the different ones are more convenient.
Yeah. Good. Next one. Question around test environments. We build a web application, deploy it in a cloud and on-premise environment, a VM behind the proxy. These environments have slightly differences, how the login works, small UI differences. Is it suggested to set up the test pipelines against both these environments, or having pipelines against a single stable environment would be sufficient?
I don't think that we will be able to answer that. But if you encapsulate these things into driver classes, then basically the only thing that you need is to have some alternative driver class which is doing a different the authentication, let's say, in a different way. If you are configuring it to run to that one, so I think the encapsulating these things into drivers is at least opening up for you a possibility for that. And I have been working in projects where this kind of dynamic switching was very useful, so that we had a fast, quick responding test environment, which we run our daily tests and the CI tests, and every night it was running against the more production-like environment, which was slower, but at least without the same scenarios could be verified for that one as well. So if that kind of quality is important, then I think this is a good strategy.
Yeah, and about if only one of an environment is enough to test, that's something you have to decide on your risk assessment, if it's okay or not.
Yeah. Testing is always comes with a cost, so that you always have to value whether the confidence that you get with the higher about the quality is compensating the costs that you have with the test. So.
Yeah. Good. And the last question for today, it's a quick one. If Spectral uses delegates somewhere, and when, if yes, where? Not really.
I don't understand the question. Maybe the question was related whether you can make your step definitions as delegates and not only
You can,
methods. You could hack SpecFlow to do that, but by default not.
no.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
That
Again,
was it.
yeah, that was it. Again, I will review the remaining questions, and if there will be something which is for generic interest, then I will quickly address them tomorrow morning. Well, so tomorrow, whenever next time we meet.
21.5 hours about.
Exactly.
Good.
Okay. So then thank you everyone for joining today, and I hope we see you tomorrow as well.
Have a nice rest of your day.
Yeah.
And bye.
Bye-bye.